back, everybody. Clint here today with Classic Firearms, here to talk about, well, since we're celebrating bullpups because of this Styrogue that you see right here, we should talk more about them. And we did mention how the U.S. hasn't really ever adopted a bullpup. They never really fielded one. Recently, yeah, there was the General Dynamics RM277 that we talked a little bit about, but one that we didn't really touch on because we knew we were going to do this video is the HK G11. The HK G11 is what people like to actually refer to it as is Kraut space magic. This thing is ridiculous. First of all, super cool and probably one of the largest innovations in firearms ever. Now, the reason that this thing even exists is because of the Advanced Combat Rifle program. Actually, a couple programs before that, but the one where it kind of got its, I guess you could say revisions and its ultimate final production, the K2, Construction 2 model. There's also a K3, but there was a lot of different variants. But ultimately, the ACR program that the United States was putting in was to ultimately look at another replacement of the M16. Recently, the Next Gen Squad weapon is the latest iteration of the M16 replacement. But as we all know it, the ACR program didn't really succeed. The M16 is still a thing, and this all happened in the 1980s, 1990s, and the M16 is still here to stay. We have it with the M16A4, the M4 carbine. It's still here, probably not going anywhere for at least another 10 years or so. I say that's just based off of speculation on my front, because the NGSW program, though it has been selected, the M7, M5, all these different types of variations and designations that we don't know what's going to be used just yet, keeps coming out and changing, which is all fun and well. But going back to it, the ACR program, not to be confused with like the Bushmaster ACR, these are completely different things. The ACR program actually kind of put forth a lot of different innovative, I guess you could say innovative ideas, none of which really actually succeeded. So what was the point? Ultimately, the ACR program looked to increase hit probability. And if you looked at a lot of the combat during that time, even today, what are you trying to increase the probability of hits on, right? Your enemy combatants that are typically moving from one cover to the next, you're at a little bit greater distance, things like that. It's not like your, Revolutionary War, actually prior to that, just open battlefield, one enemy force shooting at another enemy force, right? I mean, hit probability is actually kind of high when you're just standing in front of each other shooting inherently inaccurate firearms. You're still going to hit something probably, or someone. So you want to increase hit probability. That doesn't necessarily mean increase accuracy of the firearm. That just means, accuracy through volume, as I like to say here. What they considered, or what they called like a salvo fire. In other words, multiple rounds being sent with run trigger pull, but not necessarily full auto. Think, if you will, like 3-round burst. 3-round burst is a good example of this because you're just throwing multiple rounds in one direction and one trigger pull without just expending all of the rounds in the magazine. So 3-round burst is good at that because now if you're throwing 3 rounds in quick succession in a general area at a point target, you have a higher probability of hitting that target. So the HKG11 did a really good job at actually doing that. And how did it do it? Glad you asked, because this thing from the outside looks like a box with a grip and a scope that was attached that didn't actually have any magnification, but did kind of look like actually the original Styrogue type of reticle. So anyway, what really made this gun so unique is, and it's funny that I know it's like over here somewhere, and I keep looking over here like I'm gonna see it. That's not how this video magic works. But anyway, somewhere in this general area, you're looking at the HK-G11, and how this gun works is pretty crazy. There are only about 1,000 of them ever built, and so we don't have one here, unfortunately. We don't even have like an airsoft clone or anything. But if we did, I'd love to actually have hands-on and show you really quick, because field stripping the gun is actually fairly simple. You have 2 little buttons that you press, and the forward end would come off, and it's ultimately just a plastic cover where 2 additional magazines would ride, I should say, and it just shrouded the barrel. Same thing in the back, pull the stock off, and then that would expose this that would expose the entire mechanism of the gun. It looks like it was more so designed by a watchmaker than a gun manufacturer, if you ask me. Very complicated. As far as field stripping goes, great, cool, easy day, that's awesome. Won't complain about that. No pins, no punches, no nothing, just 2 buttons, you press and slide off. Easy day. A detailed breakdown of this firearm to maintain, to clean, or whatever else, I'm not doing it. No. It is way too complicated, and I think that's one of the reasons why the HK-G11 simply wasn't adopted. It actually did really good in its fielding and testing, and, well, let's explain why. So, when you look at different videos, or you found different videos on the internet or whatever from somebody actually shoulder firing this thing, it looks like it's got a massive amount of recoil. And if you don't know exactly what's happening, you would probably think that. Except whenever you see that, especially if you have the audio on, turn the volume up and see if you notice 3 indistinct sounds of gunfire. That's actually 3 rounds being sent downrange in a very quick succession to get you that higher probability of hitting. That's that salvo fire that we were talking about. Really, really cool. It's able to do this. Think about like the AN-94, which had that really quick double tap as the barrel was still cycling backwards, because it was a reciprocating barrel. As it's cycling backwards, it's still sending another round after the first round left. So it's got 2 rounds in quick succession to get you, again, that higher probability of a hit. Pretty neat. The difference between something like the AN-94 and the G11 is the type of ammunition that the G11 is shooting. It's actually utilizing what's called caseless ammo. And it had different chamberings, 4.7, 4.9, 4.3, all over the place. Some of it had to do with actually how the ammo was measured in the US versus Europe. But ultimately, what was fielded here in the US is the 4.9, and it's caseless. It's actually a bullet, a projectile that's, I know it's caseless, so just take what I'm about to say here as you're supposed to. Definition, it's caseless ammo, a projectile that's encased by the actual powder. And then it had like a little plastic primer that would melt as the gun is shooting and just disintegrate. Okay, it is interesting. There's nothing to eject. There's no ejection port. There is an ejection port, and that's only if you need to clear like a misfire or do really basic maintenance, something like that. And that's found on the bottom of the G11. It's a little tiny hole, little tiny opening that just allows this little caseless round to extract if there was a misfire or you were just, chambering one of the like dummy rounds that's out there for maintenance testing or whatever else it might be, functionality. Okay, cool. This gun utilizes, it's a gas-operated system, so it still uses a gas system to actually rotate a bolt. It is a rotating bolt, but not in the way that you think. The bolt actually rotates like this. It's going to be hard to explain, but if you're looking at the actual gun broken apart right now, you'll notice that on the left side of it, there's what looks like a dial. That dial is spinning forward, and that actually chambers the next round. The round kind of falls in like that. It's nuts, and it's also pretty cool. So because this ammunition is caseless, there's nothing to eject or extract, therefore you can actually have other rounds fire simultaneously very, very fast. How fast? In the 3-round burst setting, 2,000 rounds per minute fast. So yeah, I could understand why the recoil might be a little bit for those really fast 3 shots. Again, 2,000 rounds per minute. In full auto, which it did have the capability for, semi, 3-round burst, and full auto, it's anywhere between 400 to 600 rounds per minute. There's a lot of conflicting information, whether or not it was 400 rounds or 600 rounds, 460 rounds per minute. So anywhere between 400 to 600 rounds, which is significantly slower than what the 3-round burst rate of fire is. All of that is very, very interesting. And yes, just to kind of caveat somewhere else here a little bit differently, it also did have a bayonet, because why not? So anyway, this gun, again, looking at the internals, very, very complicated. And it utilizes a gas system to actually make that dial cycle and then go ahead and chamber the next round. Nothing to extract because it's caseless, so there's nothing to extract. It just goes in this dial, feeding the next round. And on top of that, it's 50-round magazines. Now, if you look at the magazines themselves, they are long, and I could tell you right now, they would break. they would break. Even the ammo actually would break. If your ammo, that encasing of gunpowder, were to chip or crack or break apart, you would have an issue with firing, you would have an issue with chambering. Actually, if you were to do, since the gunpowder is exposed in a sense around the projectile, you actually had the potential for cook-offs. The potential for cook-offs if the chamber got really, really hot. Now all of a sudden that hot gunpowder, or that heat is being, or the gunpowder is being exposed to this heat, and well, it could just send the next round without you intending to. But you at least had 50 rounds in each magazine, and the latest and the later iteration of the G11, the K2, actually had 2 compartments that sat on top of that fore-end that you could easily remove that I mentioned before to hold an additional 2 50-round mags. So a total of 150 rounds available to the gun, mounted on the gun, with only 1 mag being inserted for 50 rounds. That's actually really, really neat. So you had the potential to carry a lot of ammo. But the ammo was proven to be kind of, fragile. If it cracked or chipped, you would have to rotate that dial. There's on the left-hand side of the gun, there's like a little tab that you would rotate, and that would rotate the bolt and eject that non-spent round. Okay, cool. Fragile ammo isn't something that the United States military would really like, and those long magazines definitely left a lot of room for breakage. Again, it looks like, an old school bayonet or something else that would be hanging on your belt, and bending over or just going prone and crushing it was definitely a potential. And 150 rounds, though all attached to the gun, it sounds pretty good to me, if you ask me, as far as quantity goes, but I'd still probably like to have a little bit more. And so if you wanted to, you'd be kind of limited at that. Okay, so when you look at this and you think about some other issues happening in the world at that point in time too, I can kind of see why NATO wasn't too keen on adopting this rifle. First of all, with the United States kind of looking to replace the M16, there were also several other, I guess you could say entries into this. So there was Colt, HK, obviously, a company by the name of AAI, and Steyr. Steyr produced an ACR gun that looked a lot like the AUG, but much uglier. But all of these guns also produced their own new type of ammunition. Sounds kind of familiar, right? This, however, again, was all about increasing higher hit probabilities. So Colt actually had like a round that had 2 bullets, that one bullet was penetrating another bullet, and the idea was when you pull the trigger, they would both fly out, but of course accuracy was pretty horrible. The AAI had a flechette round, which, if you don't know what a flechette is, imagine like a little tiny needle moving at supersonic speeds. We're talking over 4,000 feet per second. That would do, some devastating damage, but also, since it was such a narrow and thin projectile, it really flew fast, but not accurately. And then the one that actually did the best was the G11 ammo that was developed by Dynamit Nobel, and that's what you got with the 4.9. So again, that no casing, that caseless, encased in gunpowder ammo is pretty cool stuff when you think about it. But again, kind of fragile and exposed to the elements as well. Don't know how the stuff would perform if it got wet and things like that. So temperamental, if you will. Okay, so a bunch of guns were entered, 4 guns were entered into this new ACR program. The G11 actually held the one most promising, and in fact, Germany actually looked at adopting it. However, at that point in time, Germany was divided, west and east, right? And then the Berlin Wall fell. And now, all of a sudden, the Soviet Union is starting to collapse, and the need to actually rebuild Germany and spend money there kind of came at a priority instead of spending money on a new rifle, especially since they're now acquiring a bunch of AK-12s. So it's kind of like, well, maybe we'll just do that and kind of forget about the G11. And on top of that, NATO trying to adopt this, it's probably not going to happen. The US already has a thing against bullpups as it is, and we have 5.56 NATO that we did. So we're probably going to keep that. So all the guns that were actually utilized in this ACR program or submitted into this ACR program were pretty much just forgotten. Well, I don't want to say exactly forgotten, but nothing really came of them, except for the optic on the Colt gun. That was, used on a lot of different firearms and machine guns and stuff today, even still. So that's kind of cool. But the HK-G11, as magical that this thing is, it's definitely a future weapon for sure. I mean, this thing was way ahead of its time, and I kind of hope that maybe one day somebody will pick up the idea of the caseless ammunition again and try to really actually perfect it. I think HK got pretty close, other than some temperamental outside factors that could actually cause problems with the gun. Again, chipping, cracking of the actual gunpowder that encased the projectile. I don't know about it being open to environmental, conditions, how well it would perform. So the idea of that, though, and not leaving any trace, also, no spent brass or anything, me as a Marine, I love that idea. Because then we don't have to police call our brass at the end of the range day whenever we spent so many hours getting yelled at about how our performance sucks, especially in the hot sun. So anyway, the idea of caseless ammunition is pretty cool if you ask me. And again, the technology behind the G11, as I look at it, that's actually not here, is really phenomenal. Again, super complicated, very German, and it's just kind of a marvel. But at the end of the day, the United States didn't see that it actually really outperformed the M16 enough to replace the M16. And due to the other factors that I've mentioned, it just didn't make sense financially or any other way. So the M16 stayed and has stayed up until now, and will probably continue to stay. So there you have it. The HK-G11 is one of those unicorn guns that I really absolutely hope to pull the trigger on one day. I've got to, at some point, I don't know if it'll ever be something that I can actually make happen or not, but fingers crossed. I'd be willing to pay money. Just saying that. So let us know what you guys think about the HK-G11. What do you think actually prevented it from becoming a thing other than just a prototype at the end of the day? Were there political factors, geopolitical factors? Was it just way too complicated of a beast to even try to handle? Again, let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below, and we will leave it off. Guys, I'll see you down in the comment section. God bless, and we'll see you soon.